All right, welcome back. Back with another weekly review here. This is actually the last region that I've yet to cover in my new format for the review series, and that is North America. I'm going to be doing North America every single Thursday, and that's because Thursday is actually the only day of the week that North America doesn't have any games. And notably, I'm actually recording this Wednesday, which is the night before, just after watching the last series of the day, which was Wildcard versus Arkosh. I'm doing that because by the time you guys are seeing this video, I'm actually going to be in the middle of traveling. And don't worry, I'm still going to be making content. It's going to be a little bit different because I am going to be away from my setup for a little while, but I just won't be able to make any content tomorrow, so I'm making this one in advance here. So yeah, overall it's been a pretty fun, entertaining week for North America. Some pretty weird results in some places, but generally in the upper division at least, a lot of consistency in the teams that we'd expect to see it from, except for maybe one, which I'll end up getting to. But again, same thing with my Western European review, which I did yesterday. This division has obviously gone through roughly a week and a half's worth of matches by the time I'm getting around to this video. So there are going to be slightly more matches played than in some of the other regions that I've covered. But regardless, I'm going to be starting off with the upper division, as I normally do, going through each and every match, doing a brief little description of each and every one, or maybe just talking about one of the teams in that match. Then going over the updated standings, and then finally taking a look at some stats, whether that be players, teams, heroes, all that kind of fun stuff. So starting off in the upper division, we had our debut on November 30th between Quincy Crew and Simply Two Based. Coming into this match, Quincy Crew obviously going through some big changes in their roster, only keeping Yawar and Quinn. However, still projected to be one of the strongest teams in this region. Not sure if they're going to make it to the first major, or at least that's what I was thinking heading into this season before it actually started. But Simply Two Based was definitely a team that I thought downgraded their roster a little bit from last season, where they already didn't do super great. They finished, I believe, 5th or 6th place in the last tour. I really didn't like some of the changes that they made to the roster, which was unfortunate. But yeah, Quincy Crew just looks like a really, really good team in this series. They take this first series 2-0, and Simply Two Base would end up having a really, really rough starting schedule, and we'll get into that later on. Following that, on December 1st, we have Wildcard Gaming versus Undying. Wildcard, of course, coming in from that lower division, previously known as D2 Hustlers. They also went through their fair share of roster changes, only hanging on to one member, that being Divide Llama. Heading into this matchup, this was definitely Undying favored, and in that series, that's exactly what we saw. This was the first time we've seen Undying since TI, and they looked like they were just as strong. Now, of course, they're not playing exactly one of the strongest teams here, but it was super clean, consistent Dota all through. And yeah, this leads me to believe that these guys should still be one of the top teams in North America. We'll see how far they go, but so far they're off to a pretty good start, beating Wildcard Gaming 2-0 very convincingly. Also that same day, we had 4 Zoomers versus Black and Yellow. In the offseason, I really like the changes that both teams made to their roster. 4 Zoomers obviously being one of the top teams in North America, but not quite enough to, never was quite able to beat the best teams in North America, those being Undying, Quincy Crew, and EG. So they were always around 4th or 5th place, while Black and Yellow kind of hovered near the lower part of the division. But again, with the changes that they've made in the offseason, they're looking like one of the better teams. And they lose this series in 3, but again, it was a very close series, very well-fought series for Black and Yellow. Shaggy looked pretty good. It's just 4 Zoomers got the best of them in this last one. I believe Gunner played Earth Spirit quite a few times in the mid lane in this series. Following that, on December 4th, we have EG making their debut in this new season, playing against Arkosh Gaming, which was one of the funniest series I've ever watched. I mean, just the whole nature of the series had both players on both teams kind of cracking up the whole time. It was a fun series all around. Game 1, notably, Arkosh actually had a pretty considerable lead. They were kind of taking control of that first game, making nice rotations, getting nice pickoffs, taking some good map control. But eventually, as usually a low-tier team will do against a high-tier team like Evil Geniuses, they just kind of start to fall apart a little bit. They don't ever get to that point where the game actually feels secure. And so EG, despite the fact that they fall short in the early part of this game, and Arteezy actually has a pretty rough game in this first one, they are still able to come back and win this one. Jerax looks good in his debut. He's playing Bane. And things are looking good for EG as they continue to snowball the game, snowball the series from that first game in the second game, where they just kind of crushed Arkosh. It was not really all that close. Following that, we had Undying versus Simply Two Based, and Simply Two Based had a real rough schedule to start the season, I will say. Starting off against Quincy Crew and Undying, 2 of the, I'd say, 3 strongest teams in North America, them being one of the weakest as Simply Two Based. So But regardless, I actually ran a poll for this series. This is when I started running the polls on my channel. And out of 22 votes, 91% of you guys thought that Undying would win this. So pretty solid. I'm surprised that wasn't 100%. Undying is a fantastic team, and Simply 2 based, you know, they had their moments in this series for sure. They actually kind of surprised me a few points, but Undying was still pretty fantastic here. And then finally, the last few series we had were December 8th, where we have Black and Yellow actually upsetting Evil Geniuses. If you take a look at all the teams that have won their series in North America this week, it's a lot of the same teams that we've been seeing quite a bit in North America, like I've mentioned, have been having a lot of sustained success. You'll see Quincy Crew, Undying, Four Zoomers, e.g. Quincy Crew, Undying, and then all of a sudden at the bottom here, it's kind of a bit strange. We don't have EG showing up again. And yeah, Black and Yellow, they look really good in this series. EG did not look like themselves. Again, they did go through some roster changes, so maybe it was an advantage starting their season off against a team like Arkosh, who has been struggling quite a bit. I think having a hole where their old mid laner used to be is definitely a big factor in the fact that Arkosh is having a tough time. But notably, EG, I mean, they looked shaky in this one, and not to take anything away from Black and Yellow. Black and Yellow played very well. I thought the whole series was pretty solid, except, of course, the game that they lost. There were a few shaky moments, but I don't think anyone really saw this coming. In fact, I ran a poll on this game, and out of 23 votes, absolutely 0 people voted that Black and Yellow thought they would win this series. So, again, I know in my last video that I did, there was a case where there was a 100% win rate for a certain team after my votes, and for this one, there was a 0% win rate. So, kind of strange there. And then finally, on December 8th, like I'd mentioned as well, we had Wildcard Gaming taking on Arkosh, and this is where we kind of saw that Arkosh might not be up to par with where they were last season. We know that a few of their players are going to be playing from Western European servers, which is quite a long ways away. I think that's like an extra like 1 to 200 ping. We notably saw their mid laner leave, who has now joined Black and Yellow, that being Shaggy. He was definitely a huge part of their team, and now it's replaced by Kyle, which is a huge downgrade if you ask me. And it's starting to show a little bit. Arkosh had a pretty rough series, and a lot of it just comes from the fact that they just really struggle in winning their lanes. Even in the changes that they made that I really liked, that did involve moving some of their players to different positions, notably Gremlo, aka Jenkins, moving to position 5 as opposed to off lane. He has looked okay at times, but he's notably been one of the more out of place players, I will say. I know that the team they played against today, Wildcard, I had talked about it in their first series, that Sammy Boy moving to position 5 from carry looked really out of place. He had a rough series in that first one. It didn't help that he was playing against Undying for his first series, but he looked a lot better in this next one. He was playing Bane a lot again. That seems to be his go-to. But yeah, Arkosh, things are starting to get a little bit worrisome for them, as Wildcard was supposed to be a team that was near the bottom of the division. Arkosh maybe won around the midpoint, maybe a little bit on the low side, and Wildcard made pretty quick work of them. This series did not ever really look close. So now taking a look at the updated standings, we have Undying and Quincy Crew sitting at the top, both 2-0 each. We have EG, Four Zoomers, Black and Yellow, and Wildcard all tied at 1-1. And at the bottom of the division, we have Arkosh and Simply 2 based. So again, when these two teams meet, Arkosh and Simply 2 based, it's going to be super important for whoever wins that series to try and get themselves further ahead than the other, because of course 2 teams get relegated, and getting that one win against the other weaker team in this division is going to be crucial. So again, it's not really very deep into the season yet. We're only 2 games in, or 2 series in, I should say. So they still have a lot of time, but it's been a pretty worrisome start for Arkosh, that's for sure. They've looked really, really weak at points. Taking a look at some stats now, out of the 18 games that have been played, Radiant has won 8 of them, Dire has won 10, and for first pick and last pick, 10 of which have been won by first pick, 8 of which have been won by last pick. For the top heroes, completely opposite to Western Europe, Luna is 5-0. Western Europe, I talked about it earlier, had an 0-5 Luna win rate. Notably, Io has been banned a lot in Western Europe, which is maybe a reason why people playing tempo heroes like Luna hasn't had so much success. But yeah, 5-0 to start, so that's pretty fantastic. We then have Puck, who is 3-0, which is a little surprising. We haven't seen too much of Puck since the Animajor. Before that, though, she was popular for pretty much an entire year. She was a very strong hero. And then Ember Spirit, 6-1, which is an insanely high win rate. 7 games, only 1 loss. Very solid performance from Ember Spirit. For worst heroes, we actually have Pangolier, who's 0-4, which is one that kind of caught me off guard. Pangolier, we've been seeing a lot in a lot of other regions, and it's been having a lot of success. Typically played in the 3 position, you just kind of make it out of the lane, you get an early Blink Dagger, and you just start fighting as quickly as possible. And it does not look like that at all in North America, 0-4. We also have Grimstroke, who is 0-4, and I'm pretty sure all 4 of those Grimstroke losses come from Arkosh. I know that has been Grumblow's go-to hero. I'll leave it at that. We then have Razor and OD, who are 0-3 each. Following that, we have Monkey King for most banned, leading the charge with 14 bans on 18 games, which is ridiculously high. Weaver with 12, and then Mars, Io, Invoker, and Ursa, all with 11 bans each. For the top teams now, stat-wise, top GPM is Undying with 24.08. We then have Quincy Crew with 23.69. And Evil Geniuses, despite losing their series today, they still are in the top 3 with 23.03. Not the best GPM ever. I think the GPM in general has been kind of low in NA, which is pretty unusual for the region, usually a very farm-heavy region. But regardless, again, same 3 teams in the same order. For XPM, Undying leading the charge with 3,039. We then have Quincy Crew with 29.37 and EG with 27.57. And then for KDA, same 3 teams again, only in different order at the start. We have Quincy Crew with 7.01 KDA, Undying with a 6.83, and Evil Geniuses with a 4.54. So this will tell you that EG stats are not necessarily bad. So the problem maybe lies a little bit more in their actual coordination around team fights. I'll let you guys be the judge of that. But again, they've looked pretty shaky at points, and you know, we're still a few months away from the major. There is the benefit of having a 2-week break for Christmas and New Year's where they're going to be able to have time to train. But they're going to need to make quick work of that, as having a loss already makes it very difficult to make it into the major, as North America only has 2 slots. So if you get to 2 losses, 2 series losses, that's when it can start looking very scary. And Evil Geniuses, they could end up missing the first major just off of this series loss. We'll see how it goes. Now moving to the lower division, I'll try and move through this one quite quickly as well, as there were quite a few matches here. Starting off with November 29th, we had the debut of the region in itself. 5-man Midas taking on Felt. They won that one 2-1, looking pretty solid there. We then had Magnus versus Electronic Boys on November 30th. This was the unfortunate series where Electronic Boys' carry disconnected in the first few minutes of Game 2 after they won Game 1. And so they had to play Game 2 4v5, which obviously didn't end up working out. Not only were they playing at 4v5, but their player that disconnected was their hard carry, which was very unfortunate. And then they just weren't able to win Game 3 with a stand-in. So quite unfortunate. They got off to a good start in that series, Electronic Boys, but it just kind of slips away from them. We then have KBU.US and DogChamp facing off against each other on December 3rd. And KBU.US looks pretty good in that one. They take that series. On December 5th, we then have The Cut beating 5-Rat 4-Staff, which is a fantastic name. I can't wait for 5-Rat 4-Staff to play against 5-man Midas, which is obviously what they're playing their name off of. That's going to be probably the most entertaining match in this lower division here. We then have Felt beating Magnus 2-1. Following that on December 6th, we have DogChamp beating Electronic Boys 2-1. So again, Electronic Boys losing a series in 3. It just kind of slips away from them a little bit too much. They end up 0-2 in total, but again, they were really, really close. They could have easily have been 2-0 to this point. So unfortunate start for them. And then finally, the last series we had yesterday, or 2 days ago actually, when you guys are seeing this, we had The Cut beating 5-man Midas 2-0. Taking a look at the standings now, we have The Cut leading the charge with a 2-0 start. They've looked pretty solid. They were, of course, the team coming in from the upper division after getting relegated. They did go through some pretty significant roster changes, notably losing Lil Nick, who now finds himself on a team in the upper division on Simply 2 based after a position change as well. But the rest of the players on The Cut that have managed to stay there have looked pretty solid. It's pretty solid to this point. Specifically, Scourge McDuck has looked pretty solid. We'll end up getting to the stats at some point, but he's leading the charge in a lot of categories. We then have KBU.US in second place with only 1 series, but 1 win. And then Felt, Magnus, 5-man Midas, and DogChamp all 1-1 so far. And then 5-Rat 4-Staff 0-1. And finally, Electronic Boys 0-2. Again, that could have easily been 2-0 start for Electronic Boys, but by some misfortune in the first series and just not playing quite well enough in the second series, they find themselves at the bottom right now. Finally, taking a look at some stats now. Over 19 games, I actually don't have the correct game amount here for the Radiant versus Dire and first versus last pick stats. But overall, in 18 games, Radiant has won 2/3 of them, which is quite high. and in first pick has been slightly favored at a 10-8 score. Again, one of those games is not there. I apologize for missing that, but in general, Radiant and first pick have been slightly preferred on in the lower division of North America. For top heroes, we have OD actually 4-0. We've been seeing some OD popping up actually in quite a few different regions. Not necessarily being the most consistent pick. It seems to be a very situational pick depending on certain points in the game, which in general is something you want to see a lot in competitive Dota. You don't want a hero just being picked because it's broken all the time. But he's 4-0 so far in the region. We then have Weaver 5-1. Weaver is one of those heroes that is just incredibly broken. He is also one of the most banned in the region, but still, whenever he is not banned, he seems to be having a lot of success. And then Mars 7-2. He's been picked in just under half of the games, and he's having a ton of success in that lower division. Again, Weaver and Mars, heroes that are popping up in a lot of different regions right now, and in general are having quite a good time. For worst heroes, we actually have Razor and Ember Spirit 0-4. So opposite to the upper division where Ember Spirit is 6-1. Ember Spirit is not having a lot of success in that lower division. We then have Bane, who is 1-4, another hero that we've been seeing a lot in a bunch of different regions, most notably in Europe, Eastern and Western. He is 1-4 right now, and then Abaddon 1-3. For the most banned, we have Batrider. I believe this is the only division or region where we actually see Batrider in the top 3 for most banned. He's got 12 so far, Invoker with 11, and Weaver with 10. Those two we've seen a lot more commonly across the DPC. Finally, now looking at the top Gbm teams, we have KBU.US leading the charge with 2474, The Cut then with 2451, and DogChamp with 2327. For XBM, we have KBU.US leading the way with 3000 exactly. We then have The Cut with 2965 and DogChamp with 2902. So the same 3 teams there. And again, same 3 teams in this last one, but in different order. We have The Cut leading the way with 6.80 KDA. We have a KBU.US with 4.85 and DogChamp with 3.13, which is actually quite low when you think about the top teams in the region and their KDAs. Usually we see anything above around 4.5, hovering maybe around 5. Especially in the early parts of the season, we might see some incredibly high KDAs. Seeing one as low as 3.13 on the mark shows that some of these games, kill-wise, are actually quite close. For top GBM players now, we then have Capron at 714, Comfort with 699, and Scourge McDuck with 610. Scourge McDuck actually leads the XPM race right now with 801, Fade with 790, and Comfort with 768. And then for KDA, something that I found about the NA DPC as well as the Western European DPC is for their Div 2, they actually included their open qualifier stats in the same league. So a lot of the KDA leaders are actually players that aren't even in the DPC. They just played in the qualifiers and had pretty good stats in their games, which is really unfortunate. So it kind of skewed my results a bit. The only actual member I was able to find anywhere near the top that didn't participate in those open qualifiers, so their match weren't skewed, was Scourge McDuck with 11.89. He is the leader. But again, there are some players that did play in those open qualifiers and in the DPC that I just wasn't able to account for because it was counting both of them. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This has been my NA week review. I'm going to be doing these every single Thursday. If you're curious about when I do every single region on which days, I have a video posted up on my channel. I'll have it linked in the description where I basically talk about which days of the week I have assigned to which region. Notably, by the time you guys are seeing this, tomorrow will be my first ever power rankings on the channel, which I'm super excited about, so feel free to check that out. Feel free to subscribe, join the Discord, link in the description, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow with another video.